For more than 2,000 years, the world has known a powerful civilization by one name: Persia. The name appears in Greek histories, Roman records, medieval maps, and Western literature. To ancient historians, Persia was the land of powerful kings, massive armies, and one of the largest empires the world had ever seen. But there is something strange about that name, because the people who lived there didn't call it Persia. They called it something else: Iran. At first, this seems like a simple historical detail. Names change over time. Borders shift. Countries rename themselves. But this situation is different, because the name Iran is not new. In fact, it's older than the name Persia. Much older. And yet for centuries, the rest of the world continued to call the country by a name its own people rarely used. So the obvious question becomes, where did the name Persia actually come from? The answer begins with the ancient Greeks. When Greek travelers, soldiers, and historians first encountered the massive empire ruled by kings like Cyrus the Great and Darius the Fourth, they were looking at a territory that stretched across 3 continents. It included lands from modern-day Egypt to Central Asia, dozens of cultures, languages, cities, an empire far too large to describe with a single local name. So the Greeks did something simple. They named the entire empire after the region where its rulers came from, a place called Parsa. Parsa was not the whole empire. It wasn't even the largest region, but it was the homeland of the royal dynasty that built the empire. To Greek ears, the word became Persis, and from Persis, the Western world eventually created the name Persia. Over time, the name stuck. Historians repeated it. Mapmakers printed it. Empires wrote it into treaties and records. For centuries, Persia became the official name used by outsiders. But inside the empire, something else was happening. The people living there continued to use a different word entirely. A word that carried a much older meaning: Iran. A name tied not to one province, but to an idea of identity that stretched far beyond any single kingdom. And that raises another mystery. If the world called the country Persia, and its people called it Iran, then what did the name Iran actually mean? The answer lies in a word far older than either empire, a word that once described an entire civilization. The name Persia did not begin as the name of a civilization. It began as the name of a place, a single region. Compared to the massive empire that would later dominate the ancient world, this place was small. Dry mountains, scattered valleys, and settlements living between desert and plateau. The people who lived there called it Parsa. Today, the region lies in southern Iran. More than 2,500 years ago, it was the homeland of a rising royal dynasty, the Achaemenids. Their most famous ruler was Cyrus the Great. In the 6th century BCE, Cyrus began conquering neighboring kingdoms: Media, Lydia, Babylon. Within decades, the empire stretched farther than any before it, from the Mediterranean to Central Asia, from Egypt to the mountains of Afghanistan. It was enormous. But the kings who ruled it still came from the same place: Parsa. When Greek historians first encountered this empire, they tried to describe what they were seeing. The lands were vast. The cultures were different. Dozens of languages were spoken inside the empire. But one detail stood out. The royal family came from Parsa, so the Greeks used that name. They called the region Persis. At first, the word referred only to the homeland of the ruling dynasty. But as Greek writers recorded the great wars between Greece and the empire, especially the conflicts with kings like Darius I and Xerxes, the name slowly expanded. In Greek histories, the soldiers became Persians. The empire they served became the Persian Empire, and the lands they ruled became Persia. It was a simple label, easy to remember, easy to repeat. But it wasn't entirely accurate, because the empire was never just Parsa. It included Medes, Babylonians, Egyptians, Armenians, and many other peoples. Yet the name of one province had become the name of them all. And once Greek historians wrote it that way, the label spread. Roman writers adopted it. Medieval scholars repeated it. European maps printed it for centuries. To the outside world, the civilization had a name, Persia. But inside the empire itself, the story was different. The people living there used another word, a word that did not come from a province. It described something larger. That word was Iran. While the outside world kept repeating the name Persia, something different was happening inside the civilization itself. The people who lived there had another word for their land, a much older word, Iran. Unlike Persia, this name did not come from a province or a ruling dynasty. It came from something deeper: language, identity, and memory. The origin of the word can be traced back to an ancient term, Aryanam. In old Indo-Iranian languages, the word meant the land of the Aryans. But in the ancient world, the term Arya did not refer to race in the modern sense. It was not about skin color or biology. It was a cultural and linguistic identity shared by early Indo-Iranian peoples who spread across parts of Central Asia and the Iranian plateau thousands of years ago. To them, Arya meant something closer to noble people or free people, a community bound by language, traditions, and shared heritage. Over time, Aryanam evolved linguistically. The pronunciation shifted. The form shortened, eventually becoming Iran. Unlike the word Persia, this name did not come from outsiders. It came from within the culture itself. Evidence of the name appears in several ancient sources. Royal inscriptions from the Sasanian Empire use variations of the term to describe their realm as Aranshar, literally meaning the kingdom of Iran. The idea of Iran was not limited to political borders. It was a cultural world shaped by shared stories, languages, and traditions that survived through centuries of conquest and change. Even after the fall of ancient empires, the concept remained alive in literature. One of the clearest examples appears in the Shahnameh, the monumental epic written by the Persian poet Ferdowsi around the year 1000. Across thousands of verses, the poem tells the legendary history of kings, heroes, and battles. And throughout the epic, the land at the center of those stories is not called Persia. It is called Iran. For the people living there, the name never disappeared. It existed in poetry, language, and cultural memory for centuries. But beyond the region, the outside world rarely heard that name. To foreign historians, diplomats, and mapmakers, the civilization still had another label, Persia. Two names for the same land, one used by its people, one used by the world. For centuries, two different names existed for the same land. Inside the country, people spoke of Iran. Outside the country, the world continued to say Persia. And the strange thing is, almost no one questioned it. By the Middle Ages, the name Persia had already spread far beyond the ancient Greek world. European scholars copied it from Roman texts. Mapmakers printed it on atlases. Travelers wrote about it in journals and reports. Everywhere in Western literature, the land was Persia. The word slowly became more than just a geographic label. It became an image. To Europeans, Persia represented a civilization of ancient kings, desert cities, and distant empires. It appeared in poetry, paintings, and adventure stories. Carpets were called Persian carpets. Miniature paintings became Persian art. The language was known as Persian. The name carried prestige, but it also carried something else. It froze the country in the past. To much of the outside world, Persia sounded like an ancient empire that had long since faded away, something belonging to the age of Cyrus the Great and Darius of Wars. Not a modern nation. Not a living society. Meanwhile, inside the country, the identity of Iran continued to exist quietly through language, culture, and history. Writers used the name. Scholars used it. Poets used it. But internationally, Persia remained the official label. Diplomatic documents used it. Foreign governments used it. Maps continued to print it. For hundreds of years, the outside world kept repeating the same name, Persia. Until the 20th century, when a new ruler began reshaping the country's identity. His name was Reza Shah Pahlavi, and he believed the world had been using the wrong name for far too long. In 1935, he made a decision that would finally force the world to change what it called his country. For the first time in modern history, foreign governments would be asked to stop saying Persia and start saying something else, Iran. By the early 20th century, the name Persia had been used by the outside world for more than 2,000 years. It appeared on maps, in treaties, in newspapers and diplomatic letters. To most of the world, Persia was simply the country's official name. But inside the country, the story had always been different. People still spoke of Iran. The word appeared in literature, in scholarship, and in the long cultural memory of the region. It was the name that connected modern society to something older than any single empire. For centuries, the two names existed side by side. One used by outsiders. One used by the people themselves. Then, in the 1930s, the situation finally changed. The ruler at the time was Reza Shah Pahlavi. He had come to power with a vision of transforming the country into a modern nation-state. Railways were being built. Institutions were reorganized. The government was trying to reshape how the country appeared to the rest of the world. And one detail continued to bother him. The name Persia. To foreign observers, the word still sounded like a relic from antiquity. Something tied to ancient empires and distant history. It suggested a civilization that belonged to the past, not a country moving toward the future. But the name Iran told a different story. It reflected the identity that had existed within the culture for centuries. So in 1935, Reza Shah made a formal request to foreign governments. From that point forward, in all official international communication, the country should be called Iran, not Persia. The change did not erase the old name. In fact, Persia never truly disappeared. The language is still known as Persian. The art, the poetry, the carpets, and the architecture are still called Persian by much of the world. The word survived as a cultural identity, but politically and internationally, the country now had a different name, Iran. And when people look back at that moment today, it can sound like a transformation, as if Persia somehow turned into Iran overnight. But that isn't what really happened, because the truth is much simpler. Persia was the name the world had used for centuries. Iran was the name that had always existed within the civilization itself. In 1935, the country didn't become Iran. The world simply started calling it by the name it had always had.